It's Monday, and it's another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. We've got a full agenda today and some new polling that we need to share with you. But before we get started, do not want to appear to be insensitive at all to what's going on in the Middle East. Right now, Israel is under siege. Gaza is under siege. We're not assessing blame. This is a horrible situation on both sides. What we are saying is that innocents on both sides are being slaughtered. And it's hard to see any progress on the basis of that. And so our hearts go out to the people in the region. And I needed to state that right off the top. I have no idea what the solution is or can be, but this is a horrible thing to watch. Do you want to comment before we get into our agenda?
No, I think that's the best thing to say in the following 48, 72 hours, because we don't know where this is going to go. We, of course, fear that this can spiral out of control. Yes. Because the region is a tinderbox, like Ukraine is, like Taiwan is. And unfortunately, we have about 3 or 4 or 5 tinderbox regions of the world. And violence, which begets more violence, can spiral out of control. Meanwhile, civilians, as you said, are caught in the crossfire. But with this one, this is the kind of thing that can spiral out of control, and civilians all over the world can feel this one. And so we just hope that cooler heads prevail and that a larger war isn't sparked from this.
From your lips to God's ear. Okay, you have led some polling, and you've done some polling on behalf of American Values 2024, which is a Super PAC that supports Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president. You have found in your objective polling that some fascinating results, and we're going to entitle this podcast today, can an independent candidate actually win in 2024? That's the broad title, but why don't you share with us some of the things that you found? Let's start with a three-way race.
Okay, well, I mean, I mean, this is this is like an onion. There's layers to this. Yeah. There's the present situation. There's the historical backdrop, and let's try and hit on all of the elements that bring us to a third-party run, which Mr. Kennedy is going to announce in Philadelphia. It looks to be that he is announcing an independent run. But so we did polling. I led the effort in for this PAC for Kennedy, American Values 2024. And this was just straight up polling. There was no really message testing here. There was no figuring out how the candidate can position himself. This is straightforward polling, and we start with a baseline question. We did a three-way between Trump and President Biden and generic, quote unquote, an independent candidate. It was a three-way race with a generic, unnamed independent candidate, and right off the bat, likely voters tell us 17% would vote for that generic, nameless independent candidate, which is huge. That tells us immediately there is a thirst. There's some thirst or some hunger. By the way, those are like Ross Perot numbers from 1992. So then we go to the next level and we ask, well, let's insert the name RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in that as that independent candidate, that third candidate, and the needle moves up to 19%. This is a nationwide survey. Keep in mind that that's the national average, which means inevitably there are states where it's lower. Conversely, there are states where it's higher. Okay, so we saw a 2-point jump. Now, to be fair, that's within the margin of error, but an unmistakable, noticeable trend as an uptick when you insert Mr. Kennedy's name. He is starting off over a year out from the election where Ross Perot picked up. Now, before I get to history, I want to now assess two other things: the candidates and how Americans feel about both parties. Whatever poll you look at, and I'm going to cite a Pew poll of U.S. adults, not likely voters, but of U.S. adults, and 63% of Americans have little to no confidence in the future of the American political system. 63%. My sense is among voters, that's probably about the same, maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher. That's not good for the American political system. Trust in institutions, including parties like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, are at lows. People are tired of candidates. What about, let's assess favorable unfavorables, right? One of the key metrics that we look at in candidates. Mr. Kennedy is the only candidate that we tested who is net positive, whose favorable ratings outnumber his unfavorable ratings. What happens when you go to Joe Biden? Among the about 55, 54%, mid-50s unfavorable, of that, 42% are very unfavorable. What about Mr. Trump? Of the 55, 56, 57% unfavorable towards Mr. Trump, 47% are very unfavorable. These two people are intensely disliked. They have been at loggerheads with each other. And so it's no surprise that any other candidate who brings that kind of style, you know, on the right, Mr. DeSantis, Ron DeSantis, also has a very high, very unfavorable rating. Nikki Haley doesn't have a high favorable rating. She's also not as well known. Gavin Newsom, we've tested, not very well known, but is among those who do is not well liked. He is not net positive. We tested a whole plethora of possible candidates, and Mr. Kennedy emerges with net positive, favorable ratings. He's picking up where Ross Perot left off. And the last thing I'll say is, you look at the last 120 years of third way runs, and we have about a dozen examples which made a mark in the political landscape. And it's about a 20-year cycle: 1892, 1912, 1924, 48, 68, 80, 92. We haven't had something really since 92. And I'm gonna leave it there for you to chime in.
So that favorable unfavorable rating for Robert Kennedy struck me because it was fairly healthy. It was 41%, 42% favorable, 32% unfavorable, and the rest undecided. Not enough information. But this is after a barrage, right, of negative media that run the spectrum from the most benign, that this race is quixotic, you know, that it's narcissistic, you know, that he has no chance, he knows he has no chance, but he's still doing it to hurt Joe Biden, to the less benign, which is that he's off center. There's something wrong with him, and that he trades off of conspiracy theories, and yet folks seem to appear to like him. So, I mean, you have done a number of these polls. What is the source of that 19%? Are they merely just saying, I don't like anybody? Or is there a Bobby Kennedy value to this equation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a combination of things, and the numbers tell an interesting story. Consistently, and I've been polling this phenomenon for quite a while, consistently throughout about a year of polling, independents were a group, a very powerful voting bloc, who make or break elections, right? Who have tended to like Kennedy more so than say, or as much versus Biden or versus Trump. So he has a very strong following within the independent voters. Moderate voters, by and large, liked Mr. Kennedy over this year of polling. There's potential with a lot of other subgroups without getting into the weeds of the data. So what is it? A lot of folks say, how do people know Mr. Kennedy? Well, I mean, he has been on Fox News. He has been in the independent media. Of course, there is the name Kennedy, which is iconic in American history. So for those who actually, have read books of his or read articles or Substacks or tweets or whatever, you have those followers. But there is this phenomenon of voters who are aware of him but are drawn to the name. There's a lot of value to that name in a landscape with hyperpolarization, in a very tumultuous landscape. And I think that there's kind of a harkening back to those days when you had people like JFK and RFK who knew how to reach across the aisle. By and large, those were people who, if not during the years that they were running in 60 and 68, gained following after their assassinations. And conservative-minded folks, a lot of them like the values that JFK and RFK Sr. represented. And so RFK Jr. is looked to be as the Kennedy who is carrying that torch of a message of peace, a message of hope, building bridges and moving beyond. Yes, he has very controversial views on some things, but he's talking to Republicans, he's trying to talk to Democrats, and he's talking among independent voters, and he appeals to disaffected voters. So that's the long story short.
And I want to pick up on those disaffected voters. I mean, you alluded to it, the Pew poll, Gallup poll as well. These are record numbers in terms of people who have no faith and are disillusioned, not only with the parties, but with government and other institutions. And who also 70+% don't want either Trump or Biden to run. But as you briefly walked us through the dates, 1892, the Populist Party, the Bull Moose Party, 1912, the Progressive Party, we forget about that one, Robert La Follette, 17% of the vote, 1924, and so on. There was disillusionment and splits within one party. This time around, it's almost a perfect storm. The disillusionment is with both parties, and it's across the board. And it's not just, this segment of the population or that demographic of the population. This is a system-wide disaffection. And so in that sense, these are some potent numbers that maybe we haven't seen since 1992 and Ross Perot. But when we get into the perfect storm, we see on one hand, the Kennedy name, as you point out, is iconic, and certainly among Democrats, although he's got broad appeal among Republicans. But then also, I've racked up my vaccines and I'm a believer, but consistently our polls and other polls show upwards of 35%, possibly up to 40%, who are vaccine skeptics. And he is the only person in running who is a genuine bona fide vaccine skeptic. There's a base there, which he broadens to the pharmaceutical companies and to running against corporate welfare and corporate unfairness. And that touches the Sanders people as well as the Trump people and a lot of folks in between.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, you hear this term more and more, the Unip Party. And so, I mean, that kind of takes me back to Ralph Nader when he wrote Crashing the Party, and he made the argument, you vote for the Democrats, you're going to get the same old Republican. You vote for the Republicans, you're going to get, regardless of which way you slice it, the United States is still going to be bogged down in wars. The United States is still going to have these great, recessions where, millions of people find themselves either out of a job or hurt, and corruption, vast corruption. Meet the new boss the same as the old boss. In other words, as Pete Townsend put it. And so here we are in this perfect storm, and it does look like the Unip Party. Yeah, Biden is now potentially going to go through a series of impeachments, perhaps, or at least the rhetoric we're going to impeach him, we're going to nail him, we're going to indict him. Same thing has been going on with Trump, and so now we're going to have two of among the most popular political figures potentially become public enemy number one. Meanwhile, we have this terrible backdrop of hyperpolarization where more and more Americans have been, by and large, finding it difficult to talk with one another, relate to one another. And here comes somebody who says, well, I want to talk to anybody and everybody. If you want to talk to me, I want to talk to you. I'll show up, to a venue, whatever, watch me on podcasts. And his name is Kennedy. And there's a proven history within the Kennedy dynasty to appeal to disaffected, to inject a sense of hope. I mean, that's just a historical fact. And he's looking to position himself that way. And so that's where we're at right now. We don't know what's going to happen, but he has this unique opportunity to carry the torch amidst this perfect storm of a historic circus.
Let's not forget the 800-pound gorilla, and that is that the House of Representatives is at a virtual standstill. I mean, there's only a 5-seat majority that the Republicans hold, but 8 members were able to cast their votes to remove the Speaker of the House, and now there'll be a rush job to get a new speaker. The projections are today's Monday, so by Wednesday. But that whoever the Republican speaker is going to be following in the footsteps of Denny Hastert and Livingston and Paul Ryan, John Boehner, now Kevin McCarthy. It has not been a successful run for the last several Republican speakers. And if we go way back to Tip O'Neill and then Nancy Pelosi, those are the only 2 that have had fairly good runs as Speaker of the House. In between that, there were Democrats who were removed or resigned. And so there is a breakdown of institutions that Americans have counted on. And the Speaker is a very important position in Washington, D.C. So today is Kennedy's announcement. Perhaps by the time we send this out, he will have already made his announcement. We'd be very interested to hear the thoughts of our growing numbers of listeners to this podcast and to the Kennedy run for the presidency. That's all I have to say. Anything to add?
I think that there's an opportunity for this election to be historical. I'm not going to make any projections over a year out, but we are living in historical times. And so it's only natural that the election during historical times has the potential to be historic. And it's kind of already shaping out. And I've been talking about for a while a political realignment. And so, maybe we're amidst it. And so, of course, we're going to track that, and we're going to be on top of that and at the center of it. So stay tuned.
Okay, I'm staying tuned. I hope everybody else out there is too. Okay, have a good week.
Yep.
Or have a good few days. We might be right back after the House elects a speaker. Bye-bye now.
Have a good one.